and she had a bad day at office, and she was like, "You're getting really complacent, and you have to do something for yourself. You have to do some masters. I'm tired of working in this organization." I think it's a very legit fear when people say that people with more experience or people who do simultaneously the GMAT and applications um, have a stronger positioning in terms of applying to these schools. I would say that's the biggest myth of all times. I got a good GMAT score, and when the moment I got it, I was like, no, I'm not going to do my application process on my own. I'm going to hire a hotshot academic consultant who charges hefty sum because more money, more quality was my thought process. And I saw an accept from Schulich, and I told my parents, like, I got through Schulich, and they were all excited. I was like, yeah, this is my last preference. I'm sure that I will get through some other school. Saying that I want to get into consulting is making a statement like, I love Indian food, right? So there is nothing known as Indian food. It's either North Indian, South Indian, Punjabi, Rajasthani, Gujarati, Marwadi, or East Indian, Bengali. So you need to be specific what you're.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Harne Podcast. I am your host, Raghavendra Harne. Consulting. If you are someone who wants to get into the field of consulting, this is the perfect episode for you. My guest today is Shrikant Raghavan, who is a senior consultant at Deloitte, Canada, and he also does some recruiting for Deloitte. Now, this is a long conversation, and hence I have divided this conversation into parts. This is obviously the first part of the conversation, and the next part will be released sometime next week. So make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so that you are notified whenever the episode releases. Now sit back and enjoy this conversation with Shrikant. Hello, Shrikant. Thank you so much for giving us your time. How are you doing today?
I'm good, and actually, thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I know that we had to do it earlier, but then I think there's never whenever it happens, it's a good time. So I'm really happy that I get to chat with you today.
And happy to have you here. And we look forward to draw a lot of insights from your experiences. So Shrikant, if you could start by telling us about your educational background, your work experience before your MBA, and where and what are you working on currently?
Okay, sure. So, okay, to the people who don't know me, I'm Shrikant Raghavan, and for the North American folks, I go by Shri because there are a lot of syllables in my name. Prior to MBA, I did my BBA in banking and insurance from Indraprastha University in Delhi. And if I have to call out my college's name, it was Maharaja Surajmal Institute in Janakpuri. Yeah, that was my undergrad in BBA, as I said. And after that, I came into the industry. At that time, I was way too naive to know that consulting in itself was an industry. I remember during my interview with Aon, which is my first employer, I went and they asked me that, what do you know about this role? I was like, I don't know anything. It just came up as a posting and I applied and I'm here. So that was my debut into human capital consulting. I worked for Aon Consulting PLC. For the people who don't know what company this is, I think the football fans and Manchester United fans would know the Aon jerseys. That's the company. See, that's the company that I worked for. And in specific, if I may say so, I was a part of the Total Rewards consulting practice, which was regarding looking at the pay for different levels for Fortune 500 companies and coming up with new pay structures for them. I worked there for 3 years. And then there came a time where my mother once came from office and she had a bad day at office, and she was like, "You're getting really complacent, and you have to do something for yourself. You have to do some masters. I'm tired of working in this organization, and now I have to retire, and I'm waiting for you to settle down." I was like, okay. So I went to my office. I put down my papers. I came back home saying that I'm going to be relieved in a month. It was like, what's happening?
Wow.
So, so yeah, it was really spontaneous for me. And also because I started my GMAT while I was working with Aeon. It didn't work out. It didn't work out to an extent that I never ended up completing my classes, and forget about scheduling a test in itself. So that never happened. So I knew that I was not good at multitasking when it comes to careers. So it had to be a be all or end all game for me. So I quit Aeon in 2017, and I started preparing for my GMAT in 2017. Took my GMAT in the October of 2017. Applied to Schulich by the end of 17. Got through Schulich in 18 Jan, and I joined the spring batch at Schulich in the September of 2018. I did my specialization in strategy and organizational behavior, basically people related stuff. And eventually, I ended up with Deloitte as a senior consultant in human cap consulting. And my job is basically to apply the lens of people, and to put it in bare bones. It is not human resources. It's basically marketing for your internal folks. So it's a mixture of organizational behavior, customer centricity, human centered design, and strategy. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Yep. Thank you so much for that. And now let's dig into the micro aspects of your journey so far. So you said that MBA for you was a very impulsive decision.
Yeah,
Yeah, your mom said that you are getting complacent and you need
yeah,
to pursue your masters. So
yeah.
once you quit your job, and
Mm,
this is a question for a lot of candidates who think that if I quit my job,
mm,
then my application may not be as strong as somebody who is working at the same
mm.
time when he's applying for his MBA.
Yeah,
What are your thoughts on that? And why
yeah.
did you specifically select Schulich School of Business?
Okay. I think people should be ready for the truth bombs that I'm going to drop today. I'll be
Uh,
super. So I think it's a very legit fear when people say that people with more experience, or people who do simultaneously the GMAT and applications, um, have a stronger positioning in terms of applying to these schools. I would say that's the biggest myth of all times, because I think it comes from a place of the Indian thought process while being in India. Because, of course, if you go to IIMs, if you go to the Indian creme de la creme business schools, they would either, first of all, you need to be a blue eyed kid to get through those with 99.99 percentiles. And of course, then if you are at a 98, you have to be extracurricularly some great person, probably an Oscar and an Olympic winner, if I may say so. And then if there is something left, you need to have work experience, right? And that is a thought process that is ingrained in us from day one. And a break year is frowned upon in India, and I think that's the baggage that we come up with when we are starting our journey for our MBA education abroad. That's not the case at all. Never ever in my interviews, and I have to be honest, for full disclosure, I applied to approximately 12 business schools across the globes.
oh,
So it was a hefty process for me to get in terms of the application process in itself. But in none of those 12 interviews, anybody asked me a question that, what are you doing right now? Why did you take a break here? Justify your break here. It was never a point of conversation. Your SOPs, your LORs, or the way you're positioning yourself to in terms of what you want to drive out of your MBA is very subjective and is driven by your aspirations. And none of your break years count in it. And even if you can do something, and I think it's a great canvas for you to talk about your break year in terms of something that you did to explore your aspirations further. So, in a nutshell, if I have to respond, I would say that um, it is not an impediment. It is not something that puts you at a back foot than somebody who's working. If at all anything, it is a wide opportunity for you to spin it off as an exploratory experience for you to apply and know your aspirations better.
Yeah, that's great because even I, when I was applying for my business schools, I had this thought that maybe, because we all struggle with studying and working at the same time.
Yeah,
So this thought came up in my mind that maybe I should resign and then write my GMAT. But then
yeah,
I read a lot of articles over the internet where they said that, say you are the person who is the interviewer and
yeah,
two candidates come up to you. One
yeah,
is working and has a good GMAT score versus
yeah,
someone who just wrote the GMAT and
yeah,
is not working. So who would you
yeah,
prefer?
yeah,
So I decided not to quit and I started. So, but thank you so much for clarifying that. I am sure a lot of people face this dilemma.
yeah,
So thanks a lot for clarifying that. And the next question to you is you applied to 12 business schools, as you said.
yeah.
And then how did you zero in on the Schulich School of Business?
Okay. This is where I become candid. So, to be honest, I got a good GMAT score, and when the moment I got it, I was like, no, I'm not going to do my application process on my own. I'm going to hire a hotshot academic consultant who charges hefty sum because more money, more quality was my thought process at that time. So I put in all my savings to get that one person. I might not be able to comment on how well they did in terms of drafting the SOPs for me because I did the major lifting in there. But one good thing that they did was was to convince me to apply to Canada because I was very vehement that I had to get to the US. And if it's not the US, it's going to be Nanyang or SMU. And one of the programs that I was really interested was HKU. It was Hong Kong University, where you had 1 year in Hong Kong University and the next year in Columbia, and you got a degree from both the schools. So that was something that I was super excited about. So this was my landscape of the 10 schools that I was applying to. And then he sat me down. He's like, okay, you are applying. So clearly, money is not an issue. So once you're doing this, why not apply to Canada and see what happens? You don't have to apply for every college, just apply for three. I had to apply for UBC, which I eventually did. Um, I applied to Schulich and I applied to Rotman. And as luck would have it, thanks to the Trump regime, things didn't look very rosy for the US folks. And I'm really fortunate that I didn't end up in US, especially never did I anticipate that I would graduate in the middle of COVID. And it would have been just a train wreck if I had been on the other side of the border from where I am right now. And this whole process of 12 applications, I got accepted only in Schulich. So,
Oh, so it was something meant to be.
so I think I didn't choose the school chose me. And I think that was the process. At that time, I was very dejected, disappointed. And of course, I had that Indian ego to actually like, oh, I surpassed the competition, So IIMs are below me, so I'll apply to ISB. ISB never looked at me. So I was super disappointed at that time. And so did Rotman, because at that time, I think the GMAT scores soared in 2018. So the minimum cutoffs were 760, 765 for MBA, Indian men specifically. So Rotman was out of the picture. So only thing that I was left with was Schulich. I remember my expression, and I feel so horrible saying this right now as well. So I saw an accept from Schulich, and I told my parents, like, I got through Schulich, and they were all excited. I was like, yeah, this is my last preference. I'm sure that I will get through some other school in the list. But my mom was like, don't be so cocky with your opportunities, But I think that's what happened. So, but in hindsight, having said all of that, I don't regret a bit that I came here and did my MBA, and now I'm in Canada.
Thank you so much for being so candid. Not a lot of people on the podcast are as candid as you. And so, I mean, that is my cue to ask you more
Hmm.
questions so that we get some honest answers, because after all, that is the value add which we are doing via this conversation. So, Shrikant, there is this, how do I put it? There is this thought that in order to get into a good B school,
Hmm.
you need to have a super high GMAT score. So
Hmm.
while that might be true for the Harvards and the Stanfords of the world,
Hmm. Yeah.
I feel it is not so important
Hmm.
in the other business schools.
Hmm.
So I see a lot of candidates really stressing over their GMAT scores.
Hmm.
So if I
Hmm.
don't have a 700 plus, I'll not even think of applying.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say to such people?
Okay. I have a very consulting answer for this. It would start with it
It
depends.
depends.
Um, but um, but to be honest, I think I have a very different opinion. And I think it's an ingrained Indian mentality that is talking about it. So I can't change it because I've been raised with it. But for me, and I think now the paradigms have changed after what you call COVID and online courses and people choosing online courses over in-person courses. But seems like a different generation itself. The time when I was applying, at that time, I think what thought process that I went from was like, if the entry requirements are lenient, uh, that depicts the quality of the institution for me, right? So if they say that, oh, we don't need GMAT, it's IELTS is enough, I will never go to that college, right? Because I have an ingrained thought like there are no takers for your school. That's the reason why you don't have entry criteria. You don't have prerequisites to join. Um, but but again, as you said, it's not always true, right? In terms of if there are stellar high GMAT scores, it doesn't mean there are super intelligent people in your class, or the the institution surpasses the lists of Forbes every year. It doesn't, for example, Schulich, it doesn't even feature on Forbes, but it is the best school, right? So I think one of the things to consider there is not look at GMAT as just a entry requirement, you know. And I don't know if you resonate with this, but I have seen some practical implementation of GMAT ever since I joined MBA until right now. You know, look at this as that opportunity for you to learn because you are getting into a business course, right? And GMAT is a total business test. The way you talk, the way you punctuate, I know as in when ever since I started preparing for GMAT and ever since I've been giving those exams to writing my SOPs, to doing my assignments in Schulich, to now writing client emails or making decks at Deloitte, those principles are ingrained in me. So I will check for a sentence if it is parallel, if I'm looking, I'm using the right words. Is it concise? Is it verbose? Is the construction correct? And I think that's the lens that we are looking at. So where I'm coming at is GMAT is not a reflection of the intellect of the people of your cohort. Neither is it a badge of honor of the college that you're applying to. A higher GMAT score is a reflection of what you call a rudimentary skill that you require to survive and flourish in a field, right? So, where I come up with an assumption is what my insight would be regarding a higher GMAT score for a college would be like, I don't know what this institution does. I don't know what value does it add, but I know for a matter of fact that if this is the GMAT score, my classmates have this basic skill set that we are equal on, and we need to build from there. So I don't know if this was a very fitting response to what you wanted to hear, but that's exactly what my take is on GMAT.
And I completely agree with you when you say that those skills are now so ingrained in us that even
Yeah,
every time I write and in an email, I make sure that, okay, so am I using, is it the verbs are perfect?
yeah,
Every time I put a comma, so is
yes,
that correct? The critical reasoning, the reading comprehension, all of those skills do come in handy. And
right,
I think it's just something which is ingrained in us now and we cannot get rid of that. So I
correct.
completely agree with you over there. So,
Yeah,
Shrikant, you have also been at Schulich, the advisor for people who want to get into consulting.
yeah,
And consulting is a hot field to get into right now. Everyone wants to get into consulting, especially management consulting.
yes.
So, for our listeners, what would your advice be to break into consulting for somebody who has a consulting experience and for
Hmm.
somebody who does not have consulting experience?
Very good. Okay. So I think this is going to be the meaty part of the conversation. But yeah, I think before diving into my thoughts of consulting, I would start from a place about what I used to hear when I was a student or aspirant and wanting to get into consulting. Uh, so usually we have the buddy system, right? So before you come into the school, there is somebody that is associated with you who help you to get familiarized with Canada, Schulich, and whatever questions that you might have. So I asked that person if I want to get into consulting. And this is invariably the first thing that anybody that I connect with, any future aspirant, I've connected with so many people. And this is their first question is like, we want to get into consulting. What do we do about it? So that guy told me it's very competitive. Have a plan B for yourself. It is very difficult. Everybody wants to get into consulting, but it's not very easy. So it's probably be ready to think about it. And then there is this another school of thought which comes in, and you would hear many times when you go to career advisors, they would say that, oh, you're trying to pivot your industry. Okay. But do you realize that there are multiple moving objects here? You are coming from, you are already pivoting a geography, so you need to have something constant. So you choose either a country as a pivot, or the industry as a pivot. It is too difficult or unrealistic to have multiple pivots in one go. And eventually you're pigeonholed into the same shit that you were doing before your MBA. So we have been through that, and anybody who's listening to this, if you resonate with this, let me tell you and reassure you, you are not alone. All of us who are here have been going through this. But having said that, now I come to the major part of this thing about consulting. I think saying that I want to get into consulting is making a statement like I love Indian food, right? So there is nothing known as Indian food. It's either North Indian, South Indian, Punjabi, Rajasthani, Gujarati, Marwadi, or East Indian, Bengali. So you need to be specific what you're talking about. No one food can represent India or Indian food. Similarly, consulting in itself is an industry, right? But consulting in itself is not a job, right? It's a role of a consultant. uh, it's very important for you to know that where in this wide gamut of industry do you fit in, right? And that's a very exploratory process. And I don't expect anybody applying to an MBA school or being in the first year of their MBA school to know where they want to end up in consulting. If it is not possible for you to know. And I'll tell you what the response it would be. And most of the people be like, what does this dude talking? I know where I want to be. I want to be in strategy and ops. Because that's the most sexy title in consulting that you could ever get. And if you're thinking that you want to be in SNO, let me tell you, you are in the mainstream because everyone who's thinking of consulting is thinking of SNO. But it doesn't happen that way, right? There are very specific hardwired skill sets that you need for very specific streams of work. So let me touch upon with the what you call shallow knowledge of consulting that I already have, which is I know people who have worked for risk advisory, people who work with strategy and ops. There are people who work with mergers and acquisitions. And then comes the space where I work in, which is change management. And there are a wide gamut of stuff. Nowadays, there is this whole stuff for AI and data analytics. And there is some data-driven consulting, which is completely different, which I don't know. They talk a language that nobody else understands out here. So it is do that market scan. Where are you coming, and where do you want to get to, right? And how do you know where do you want to get to is either a process of intuition or elimination, right? So many a times, when what do you mean by intuition? You know that you're driven for the roles that involve people in some front, which was my case, right? Then came the crossroads. Okay, I like people. Human capital has people, marketing has people. What do I do? What do I do? Where do I go from there? Then you apply the rule of elimination. I applied to marketing roles. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like search engine optimization. I didn't like those keywords. I am a creative person, but I didn't like the whole rigmarole of building a commercial, building an advertisement, or you having a user experience design. That was way too technical and way too annoying for me. Um, Human capital was familiar to me. It was something. It had a language that I used to speak naturally. So I levitated towards this industry and found the space that I work on. And these two steps could be used interchangeably. And many a times it happens interchangeably because rule of elimination was the first thing that probably I applied to know that anything that had to do with supply chain and numbers, it's not my jam because I'll get bored, right? And personally, for me, supply chain wasn't sexy, and numbers, I was dyslexic to maths. So I was like, this is not happening. So clearly, these are the fields that I'm left with, and this is where I want to get to. This is something that is about the interest. Now, an interest in itself is not sufficient for you to find a role, right? So that's when we talk about the skills. What skills do we need? What do we need to do? And people who are aspiring for these roles in Big Fours, they cram up this case in point, and then they would do a lot of shenanigans in and around it. But then you don't have to do it for consulting. Your major role is to demystify complex stuff. So if you're able to engage an audience, if anybody who has been watching this and they sit through the 40 minutes of this interview with me, then probably I've been successful in being a consultant. If they if they go out of the interview in the first 2 minutes, then I've miserably failed, right? So that's the first thing. And then how you visualize, what is your storyboarding, narrative skills, how are you presenting yourself, how are you trying to bring out your value, and all of these are very soft skills. There is no specific course designed for consulting. There is no specific mantra book that you could go read and be an awesome consultant. And neither is it something that we would say that consultants are born and not made, right?
Yeah.
So it is not that. It is something that you know what your space is, and you identify those spaces, and cultivate those sensibilities or awarenesses about yourself and what is required for the role that you would be in, for you to land up an interview into consulting. And moving from an interview to converting to that job and being at the job, those are very different conversations. But I think to have a foot in the door for consulting, these are the skills that would be required.
And this was the first part of our conversation. If you enjoyed it, please press the like button, Subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon so that you are notified whenever the next part is released. This is me, Raghavendra Harne, signing off until the next time.